The Many Adventures of Iron Dad and Spider-Son by LBIGreyhound13. Chapter 17. Kidnapped, Part 3.
"We're at the police station right now," Happy said as he spoke on the phone with Rhodey. "They put us in a room, and they're going to give us what they can."
He paused as he watched May and Pepper sitting at the table. May was sobbing silently as Pepper wrapped her arm around her, while shedding a few tears herself.
Yeah, I'll call you back once we know more."
Rhodey spoke up again.
"Will do, man. Let us know if you find anything too." "Okay, bye."
The forehead of security sighed as he hung up the phone and sat back down next to May.
"Rhodey says he's going to help however way he can."
Pepper nodded. Thank you, Happy," she said with tears running down her cheeks. She sighed, feeling so helpless as she rubbed May's arm soothingly. She wanted to say something, but what could she say? Both her fiancé and May's nephew were kidnapped, and they had no idea where they were, or taken by who. Thankfully, she had a Stark jet in Florida, because she wasted no time in coming back to New York in under 2 hours, and drove with Happy and May to the police station. "I can't believe this is happening," May said through her sobs with her hands over her mouth. "This just can't be happening." Ever since she got that phone call from Happy, telling her that her nephew, her baby, and his mentor were kidnapped in the middle of a gala in front of other people, how could this be happening? Why didn't anyone stop them?
"Hey, May, look, don't worry, okay?"
Happy said quickly as he sat down next to Peter's aunt.
"We'll get them back."
"Happy's right," Pepper said through her tears. "No matter what, we will get them back. The police and Rhodey will do everything they can." May was just about to reply when her phone suddenly vibrated in her pocket, causing her to jump. But she quickly took it out, only to see that it was Ned. It's Peter's best friend, Ned. What do I tell him?" She knew she would need to tell him. But how could she tell him that his best friend was kidnapped? "You have to, May," Pepper said. "If he doesn't find out from you, he'll likely find out from the news." She looked at Pepper and then at Happy, who nodded. So she took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Ned," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hey, May," Ned said nervously. I just saw the news. My mum and I did." May closed her eyes as tears streamed down her face. I tried to call Peter, but his phone went right to voicemail." "So, is it true? Because MJ tried too and couldn't get in touch with him either. And now I'm really freaked out right now." May sighed. Yes, Ned," she sighed shakily. It's true. He was with Mr. Stark at a gala tonight, and they were both taken." "Oh my God," Ned said shakily. What? Where?"
"We don't have the whole story yet," May said quickly. "I'm at the police station with Pepper and Happy, and we're going to talk to the cops and see what they know, okay? I promise I'll keep you and your mum updated, okay?"
"Okay," Ned replied shakily. I hope he's okay, May. Me and my parents do."
"I hope so too, sweetheart,"
May said. As soon as she said that, the door opened, and Chief Harrison walked in.
"I have to go. We'll keep you posted."
"Okay, thanks. Bye," Ned replied.
"Bye,"
May replied before hanging up the phone.
"I'm sorry. That was Peter's best friend, Ned. He heard what happened."
The chief nodded.
"I get it, Mrs. Parker," he said as he sat down. "I would like to go over with you three what we know so far, and what we can do next."
May, Pepper and Happy nodded. Chief Harrison nodded in return before sitting back down.
"Okay, so," he began, "my officers gathered witness reports. From what we can tell, about an hour or so in, just as speeches were about to be made at the gala, a group of men burst in and told everyone to get down onto the ground. The gunman, we presume him to be the leader, shot once to get everyone to be quiet. And then witnesses said that they wanted 2 people to come with them. That was when the gunman demanded for Mr. Stark and his intern to come out of hiding. From what we saw in the video, they threatened to shoot a civilian, but Mr. Stark stopped them and announced himself without Peter. Once that happened, they demanded to know where Peter was. They knew he was Stark's intern, and they threatened to shoot Tony to draw Peter out, and called him by name.
Pepper closed her eyes and began to cry as May gasped, "So they knew who Peter is?" May said. Chief Harrison nodded.
"It looks to be that way. Once they threatened Tony," he continued, "Peter announced himself and came out of hiding. Then the men forced them to leave through the kitchen. Security cameras spotted a black van, but we lost sight of it after it left the city."
"Oh my God," May said as she covered her face with her hands. Not only were Peter and Tony kidnapped, but Peter was forced out of hiding when Tony's life was threatened. She should have remembered how fiercely loyal her nephew was to Tony. Of course he would try to protect his mentor just as Tony would protect him. "Well, if Tony only came out first," Pepper began, trying not to burst out crying over her fiancé and his intern, "then he must have tried to protect Peter first." From what Pepper had seen whenever she was with Tony and Peter over the past few months, Tony really cared about Peter. Tony said that he wanted the team to be better than him, to become the best superhero and person he had the potential to be. In doing so, Peter brought out a side to Tony that not everyone got to see. They needed each other, relied on each other, and it was becoming a beautiful connection.
"Right," the chief replied, "which is why we're putting out an APB and Amber Alert for the van, and for Tony and Peter. We'll look at the evidence and do everything we can to find Tony and Peter and bring them home. I'll also have my guys seek every attendee if they heard or saw anything. Chances are that the video is all we got, but every detail counts. Which brings me to what I need you all to do. I need you 3 to think of any enemies that Tony might have. Any times Peter and Tony were together in public. Chances are that if they knew who Peter is, they could have been watching them, and any time Tony and Peter mentioned or hearing anything suspicious."
"Yes, absolutely," Pepper said, nodding.
"What are the chances this is a ransom?"
May suddenly asked. The chief stared at Peter's aunt and sighed.
"At this point, Mrs. Parker, we need to look into all inquiries at first, to be sure,"
Chief Harrison replied.
"Just to be on the safe side, we will trace your phones in your homes and your cells, just in case someone tries to contact you. Another possibility would be that Peter could be used as a bargaining chip for Tony, but we'll work every angle we get. Make no mistake, we will bring them back. We will find them, and bring them back no matter what."
"Thank you," May said, smiling through her tears. "Is there anything we can do in the meantime?" Pepper asked.
"Not right now, Mrs. Potts," the chief replied. "Go home and try to get some sleep, and let us do our jobs. We will call with any updates or further questions."
May, Pepper and Happy all nodded in unison.
"We do have War Machine, who's ready to help any way he can," Happy added after a moment of silence. "Good. I'll keep that in mind if things get crazy," Chief Harrison replied. "Now that we've covered that, before you leave, I do have to ask. I know you said that Mr. Stark would have tried to protect Peter first. So, why are they so close? I mean, how would you describe their relationship?"
May, Happy and Pepper looked at each other, and then back at the chief. The question didn't sound accusing at all. It didn't sound like he was implying anything perverted when asking why Tony and Peter were so close, what their relationship was. They just weren't sure of how to answer that question, but they had to try.
"Well, you see, Tony and Peter met at a science fair at Peter's school," May began. "Tony came to judge, and the winner would be granted an internship through the September Foundation. And he saw Peter's project and was impressed. Ever since then, Peter has been Tony's intern. And things were, Happy thought back to the vulture incident, rocky at first, but after a few months, they just clicked.
They became really close after that, Pepper added. They've been close since then. You know, Tony saw Peter as someone who could be better than him with guidance.
And for Peter, May began, he's always looked up to Tony, especially after he became Iron Man. They met after Ben died, and Tony became this outlet for him, this male figure he needs in his life. In a way, he's been picking up where Ben left off. They care about each other, and look out for each other.
She had seen it in the past few months. Tony took a picture with him to prove to the school that Peter's internship was legitimate. They stayed in touch after the vulture incident, and Tony even looked after Peter for a full weekend with no questions asked. Tony even wanted his intern to come to work with him every week, to make this internship a reality, not just a cover story. And since then, their relationship continued to grow.
Okay then, if that's the case,
the chief said, letting their words sink in.
Then whoever has taken them will likely try to use Peter against Tony. But like I said, we'll do whatever we can to find them.
From what they had heard from Peter's aunt and Tony's fiancé and bodyguard, this relationship between Peter and Tony was deeper than a friendship, a work partnership, an internship. But it was hard to put into words exactly what it is. Time seemed to pass slowly after Hammer and his men left Tony and Peter in the room, completely locked in, and they refused to leave each other's side as they continued to cling to each other, almost as if they were afraid Hammer would come in and separate them both. Tony refused to let that happen. He refused to be separated from Peter. He refused to do so when they were called out and forced out of the hotel and into the van. But once Peter's life was threatened, that increased tenfold. He couldn't stand the idea of Peter being taken away from him and not having him within his reach. He couldn't help but wonder if Peter was thinking the same thing, with the way the kid was clinging to him, wanting to be close to him as possible. What do you think May, Happy and Pepper are doing right now? Peter asked suddenly, causing Tony to jump slightly.
I'm sure they're doing everything they can to find us, buddy,
Tony said as he buried his face in Peter's hair. Peter sighed as he buried his face in Tony's chest further, gripping onto Tony just a little tighter. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his pounding heart. He wished, more than anything, that this was nothing more than a nightmare, that he would wake up and find himself on the couch next to Tony or May in the middle of a movie. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was painfully real. He and Tony were locked in a room by Justin Hammer, and this guy was using him to get to Tony. His mentor hadn't said he was going to do it or not, and Peter didn't bother to ask. The selfish part of him wanted Tony to just agree to it, just so he wouldn't be killed. But the selfless part of him overpowered it. He didn't want Tony doing anything for Hammer. There was no way he could give up his work, his company, for him. He prayed that he and Tony would get out of this together and not have to worry about Hammer's ultimatum. However, while his heart pounded over the fact that he was threatened, he felt calmness wash over him as he held on to his mentor for dear life. Tony's embrace and voice kept him grounded, reminding him that they were still together. Yes, they were kidnapped, but they were together. He refused to ever let Tony be taken from him, to let them be separated. Not just because he was scared, but because he wanted to protect Tony. He had to protect Tony, no matter what. Mr. Stark, Peter finally said after a moment of silence.
Yeah, kid?
Tony replied. You're not going to leave me, right? He asked. Normally he would never dare to ask his mentor that kind of question. It was childish, but now he didn't care. They were kidnapped and in a locked room together by Justin Hammer. They needed each other. They had to protect each other. Had to help each other know
matter what. Not even for a millisecond, kid, Tony said firmly. We're in this together, no matter what. Remember? I've got you.
Peter breathed a sigh of relief. I've got you too, Mr. Stark, he said. He then sighed again. Look, don't agree to what he wants. Please, you can't do that.
Kid, he threatened you, Tony replied. He threatened to kill you. I can't take that chance.
So long as we're together, you can protect me, Peter said, looking up at Tony. We can protect each other. Tony sighed as he pulled Peter close to his chest, holding him tightly. He was just about to answer when Peter suddenly shot up again, and his eyes looked at him wide with fear.
What is it, Pete?
He asked. I hear them coming, Peter replied with widened eyes. They're coming back. Tony exhaled in fear as he heard someone punching in the code, and he wasted no time in moving so that Peter was right behind him again. As he shuffled himself in front of Peter, he started to believe what Peter had just said. That as long as he could protect Peter, Hammer wouldn't be able to touch Peter, to carry out his threat. Somehow, he could protect Peter, protect his intern. Within a minute or so, the door opened, and Hammer walked right in with a smirk on his face, his hands behind his back, and with the gunman behind him. Well. Nice to see that you're still awake, Hammer said. I thought you would have conked out hours ago. Kinda hard to do so with that stupid ultimatum on your hands, Peter retorted over Tony's shoulder. Shh, Tony said once again, shielding Peter. You know, Tony, Hammer said, you really should teach your baby boy some manners. It's not good to not discipline a child. Tony briefly rolled his eyes as he remembered that Hammer still thought that Peter was his biological son. He couldn't bring himself to talk about that earlier, but he and Peter had more pressing issues to worry about. However, that didn't stop Tony from feeling embarrassment that Peter was thought of to be related to him, as a biological son. He was about to say something when, I have to ask, Hammer asked, raising an eyebrow at his rival. Have you made your decision, Tony? The billionaire began to shake as he moved closer to Peter, pushing him closer to the wall behind them. He couldn't help but remember what Peter had said, how he didn't want him to build the Iron Legion and the arc reactor and give up the company, how he could protect Peter, and that they could still be together. He glared at Hammer. Forget it, arsehole, he said firmly. It's not happening. I am not doing your dirty work. Peter smiled to himself, hearing his mentor stand up to their captor, telling him that he wouldn't do what he wanted, as he grabbed onto Tony's suit jacket again. He knew that he should have left Tony to handle it. His mentor had this. However, that little victory was absolutely crushed when he saw the smirk fade from Hammer's face, and his face darkened. Really now, he said. I have to say that I'm shocked. I was so sure you would have said yes. You don't scare me, Hammer, Tony retorted. But if you think I'm going to let you anywhere near this kid, you've got another thing coming. Is that what you think? Hammer asked, raising his eyebrows. He paused. Restrain, Stark. What? Tony asked. His eyes widened and his heart pounded. Well, wait! Before he could say or do anything else, two of the men grabbed him by the arms and dragged him to his feet. Away from Peter. Wait! No! Let me go! Don't! Leave him alone! Don't touch him! Don't you dare touch him! He struggled to break free as he watched Peter still sitting on the floor, completely stunned and scared, as Tony was dragged over to the right wall of the room. Make sure he can see his baby boy, Hammer said to his lackeys. You got it, boss, the leader said as Tony continued to struggle out of their grips, to get to Peter, to protect him. He and his colleague pushed Tony's arms up against a metal bed frame and restrained him with zip ties. Stop! Tony shouted as he continued to struggle. Stop! Please! Don't you fucking touch him! Leave him alone! Sorry, Tony, Hammer said casually, as he moved to stand next to the billionaire. That was the deal. I told you What would happen if you refused? His lackeys dragged Peter to his feet, as he himself continued to struggle out of their grips, to get to Tony. However, they refused to let Peter go, as the leader went up to the kid and punched him across the face. "No! Stop!" Tony shouted as he continued to struggle against his restraints. He didn't care about the zip ties digging into his skin. All he cared about was Peter. "Please! Please! Leave him alone!" "There's only one way to get them to stop, Tony," Hammer said nonchalantly. "You know what it is." Tony stared at his rifle with widened eyes. "No! Please, Mr. Stark, no!" Peter said pleadingly as he struggled. "It's okay, really, I'm fine. Don't listen to him. Don't do what he—" "Shut up, you little shit!" the leader said as he grabbed Peter by the hair, causing him to scream involuntarily. He then punched Peter again. "No! Stop! Please! Please!" Tony shouted as he struggled, refusing to give up. He couldn't help but feel like he was being back in Killian's hideout, handcuffed to a bed frame, feeling helpless as he watched Pepper succumb to the extremes against her will. "Please, Hammer! You can stop this! He's just a kid!" "I told you, Tony," Hammer said casually, completely unfazed by Tony's panic. Tony could tell that he even loved seeing him freak out, but he didn't care. All he cared about was Peter's safety. And there was one way to do it. "Fuck you, asshole!" Peter said as he glared at Hammer. "You're crazy! Mr. Stark's not doing anything for you!" "Shut up!" the leader shouted as he practically threw Peter to the floor and got down on top of him. "I'm punch! So punch! Sick punch of punch! You punch talking! Peter!" Tony shouted with tears in his eyes as he watched the leader continue to punch Peter in the face. "Please stop!" He knew what he had to do, and he didn't care. He couldn't stand to watch this anymore. "I'll do it! All right, I'll do what you want!" "Hold it, men!" Hammer suddenly cried. Finally, they stopped as silence washed over the room. Peter looked up at his mentor through his bruises and bleeding nose, breathing heavily. "What is it that you'll do?" Hammer asked Tony. He sighed as he threw his head back against the bed frame. "I'll build you the suits and the arc reactor and sign my company to you." Hammer smirked. "Excellent," he said. "I knew you were a genius." "Only if Peter stays with me," Tony said firmly. "So long as he sticks with me, I'll do it." "Fine with me," Hammer said, shrugging. "After all, you are his father." The leader got up, leaving Peter on the floor, but not before bringing his foot down on Peter's stomach, causing the teen to scream and curl up on his side. "Peter!" Tony whispered as he kept his eyes on his intern. He didn't even bother to look as the men in black finally released him. He wasted no time in rushing to Peter's side and gathering him up into his arms. "I'm right here, kid. I'm right here. I've got you." "My men will bring you supplies," Hammer said as he and his men walked out of the room. "I'm so glad you saw a reason, Tony. And don't worry. As soon as you complete everything I asked for, you and Peter will be set free. Hey, we'll even drive you back to the city." Tony didn't even say anything as he held Peter tighter, listening to Hammer closing the door and locking them in yet again. "No, you won't," he thought to himself. He wasn't stupid. He knew better than to believe that Hammer would actually let Peter and him go afterwards. It was no different than when he was kidnapped by the 10 Rings in Afghanistan, and had no one but Yen Sin to help him. The leader said the exact same thing. But had Tony not escaped, he surely would have died. He saw their faces and knew who they were. They wouldn't have let him go, just as Hammer wouldn't have let them go. He would kill them once they outlived their usefulness. And the thought of Peter dying scared him. He refused to let that happen. "Mr. Stark," Peter finally whispered after a moment of silence. "Well, why did you agree to that? Your work, your reactor. Why? His face hurt beyond all belief as he looked up at his mentor with bruised eyes. He felt his nose bleeding, but he didn't care. All he could think about was how he had let himself get beat up, and that got Tony to change his mind. The billionaire looked down at his intern as his heart hurt at the sight of the bruises forming on his face and the bleeding.
How could you possibly ask me that, kid? Tony replied. I needed to protect you. I wanted to protect you. I care about you way too much. I've grown quite fond of you.
Peter couldn't help but smile at Tony's words. Hearing how the man cared about him, wanted to protect him, and was fond of him. Well, that's a ditto from me, Mr. Stark, he said, leaning into Tony's warm embrace.
Good,
Tony said as he shifted himself so that his back was against the wall, with Peter next to him.
Because I'm not stopping until both of us are out of here and away from this place. I have a plan.
Peter's brown eyes lit up upon hearing that Tony was trying to get them home. What is it? He asked.
Remember when I was kidnapped in Afghanistan?
Tony asked. He did remember. Tony didn't give him all the details, but he knew about how Tony got himself out of that cave. Okay, he said. Can I help?
Absolutely. I need my lab buddy,
Tony said. If Hammer could see that Peter was helping him, he wouldn't be tempted to try anything, especially when it looked like he was getting exactly what he wanted. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one because holy shit, that got nasty. Oh my god, that screaming. You don't see Tony verbally lose it that much. And him just yelling in utter panic because Peter's being hurt. Oh god, that bit where they were punching him in the face. Oh, poor baby. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.